All right. First rule of this channel, we do not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the 2024 Buccaneers fantasy football offseason preview. Some news and notes to get into before we start breaking these guys down. Like if you're kind of new to the channel, I really think Rachaad White is going to be undervalued. We'll get into that a little bit later. We're going to do some fantasy theory. That's kind of what the point of the channel is. First and foremost, this is not an IDP channel. This is basically just for the most part, redraft, traditional redraft type of leagues. That's what I like to do. Do a little dynasty stuff. I would like to get back into a dynasty league at a certain point, but I currently am not doing that. So not IDP, but I'm going to get someplace with this here in a second. So Anton Winfield Jr., he signs a 4-year deal with the Buccaneers, $48 million, highest paid defensive back. This guy is really, really good at football. He's one of those guys that will change the game because of how he can be used. He can play deep safety. He can run a little man, come up in the box. Like he's that type of safety. I, as a football coach, tend to think that certain people do not understand the game, and that includes like professionals, because a guy like this will do more to change a game than a mid-level quarterback. And we'll get into that here in a second. Jared Goff, he signs a 4-year, $212 million deal with the Lions. Now, I'm not saying Jared Goff is bad at football. What I'm saying is you're paying a guy $53 million a year, that gigantic hit against the cap, to go lose a football game to Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. You can do that with a Brock Purdy or a Gardner Minshew at $15 million a year. You don't need to pay an okay quarterback to go lose a game that he can't win because he doesn't have the talent to do that. Now, this is not me knocking Jared Goff. Again, he's good. He's been to the Super Bowl. From a fantasy perspective, he's been quarterback 12. He's been quarterback 6. He's been quarterback 7 last year. He's good at football. That's not my point. I would rather have 3 Anton Winfield Juniors that are going to change the game over one Jared Goff that is highly replaceable, that I probably paid like 2 times the amount of money that he's worth versus replaceability, because you're too scared to go out there and find a Brock Purdy out there in the draft. Now, other news, Marquez Valdez Scantling, MVS, he signed with the Bills. This is getting a little interesting when it comes to Keon Coleman. I think Keon Coleman can play the Z. He's probably going to be better, especially as a rookie, as the X. They went out and they also signed Mac Hollins, who can play special teams, and Chase Claypool, who's kind of a meme at this point. But with all these guys on the roster, it really makes me think we're going to get closer to this Rashid Rice situation last year, where he didn't really start becoming fantasy relevant until week 12. And we had to watch this snap share go up, this usage go up as the season went on. And we could argue about like his week 16 performance, whether or not you won a league with Rashid Rice. But overall, if you had Rashid Rice going into the playoffs, you probably did win your league, running him as your like wide receiver 3 or your flex, even as a replacement RB or wide receiver 2, because again, this is about finding the value of a guy as depressed as possible, i.e. pulling a guy off the waiver wire late. I don't want to be overdrafting a guy. And a little bit of the theory on this one, when we talk about like how I do my rankings, it's heavily based off of all these other ADPs that are out there. I want to take advantage of how inappropriately valued other people have guys. So, and I bring this up with Ladd McConkey. We're going to talk about Rashid Rice here in a second. That he's on Fantasy Pros. He's wide receiver 47, 108 overall. I am not going to be drafting Ladd McConkey at this ADP. I have him as wide receiver 9. That's because I think he's so criminally undervalued that I will be willing to play up multiple rounds to go get a Ladd McConkey. Now, when we bring this one up, if I can go find the one that I want, I have it pulled up right here with these guys. Like Kyren Williams, he finished last year as wide receiver or running back 2 overall in points per game. I would not go up and spend a second round pick last year on Kyren Williams if I knew ahead of time. I knew in my heart of hearts, my tummy's telling me Kyren Williams, he's a league winner. I'm not going to go up and spend a second round pick on this guy because the ADP tells me I can go get Kyren Williams for free off of the waiver wire after my draft is over with. So if I want to walk out of a draft with Kyren Williams last year, I'm spending a 13th round pick. And it's the same thing with Puka, who finished as wide receiver 4 last year. I'm not spending, a first round or third round or second round pick on a Puka Nacua. I'm pulling the trigger on a 13th or 12th round pick on these guys, because even if I know this ahead of time, I'm attacking the flaw in my opponent's strategy, that they're undervaluing these guys so much. And I talked about this with like Puka Nacua, that in my auction draft, we were like, hey, we're not going to draft this guy, because if we put him up for auction and someone just decides to snake him from us, we can take a guy that we can get for free and then have to get into a bidding war with him. So that there's a strategy component to how I value these guys relative to ADPs and the ranges of outcomes for players. Like, guys that can win me leagues have to be higher up on my board, because of that range of outcomes, that if I hit on him, I'm going to have a better chance to win my league. If a guy has the ability to finish as, a mid-range wide receiver 2, he has less value to me, because like, what are the chances that he's going to win my league, unless it's like a Rachaad Rice, where I'm getting essentially like a wide receiver 2. And in the case of Rachaad Rice, in a lot of leagues, like, he didn't return on investment very early on. He was getting thrown away for free. To be able to pick him up right before he has this stretch between like week 12 and week 17, that's where you want to pick him up. He's not gumming up your roster. He's going in your lineup. He's going to win you your league. So you want to try and pick him up, around like week 9, week 10, if he's been released in your league. People are getting very savvy about this, and they're going to be picking up your Keon Coleman's. If I can bring him back up, they're going to be going out and getting your Keon Coleman's. They're going to spend on him at the appropriate value of the draft, probably about like a 10th or 11th round pick. And they're going to have the patience to hold on to him until week like 12 to hopefully get this year's Rachaad Rice, because the Bills are bringing in guys like MVS and Mac Hollins and Chase Claypool to play that X position and say, Keon Coleman, when you're ready, we'll give you the keys to the kingdom. They're not going to give him, it doesn't look like they're putting themselves in a position where they're like, you have to go out there, you have to start, and you have to go out there and be a game changer week 1 of your rookie season. So anyway, let's get into the breakdown for the Buccaneers. Last year, they finished 23rd on total yards in the league. They weren't very good. 17th in passing yards, 32nd in rushing yards. They were the worst. And then 20th in scoring. And this is going to get a little bit interesting with them, that the offense was not good. And it's really hard to bet the under on not good, because you have to like figure out a way to be worse than bad. And that's what the Buccaneers were. But now this is a little misleading, because they definitely got through a rough patch at the beginning of the season. They turned it around, and they kind of finished in the like okay department, and we'll get into that a little bit. But overall, like, they weren't good, and especially like that 32nd in rushing yards, like that was a pretty miserable stretch at the start of the season that they never could dig a hole out of. And we'll kind of break that down here. So their draft class was first round draft pick was Graham Barton, center out of Duke. And I really like this. Like, he can come in, he played guard, center, tackle. This is just going to upgrade their offensive line. That was one of the things that over the last couple of years have been a problem with the Buccaneers. They do have some guys, Cody Mach out of South Dakota State, that I like. And then Tristan Wirfs. So they should theoretically be able to put together an offensive line that is in the like okay to like pretty good category this season going on in the offseason. So third round draft pick, Jalen McMillan out of Washington. Again, with these Washington wide receivers, not Rome Odunze. I like them. I don't love them. This is probably more of a long-term solution, with Mike Evans being 31 and Chris Godwin going into the final year of his contract at 28. And then you're looking at Trey Palmer potentially projecting into being like the number 1 or number 2 in the next couple of years. Like, I could definitely see a lineup with Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan being in that like okay to pretty good as a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 type of combo, even if neither of them are like necessarily great. I don't know how much he's going to have redraft value this year. From a dynasty perspective, yeah, you're definitely looking at like 2-3 years down the line to figure out this wide receiver room. And that's if like Baker May, and we're going to talk a lot about Baker May, because he's probably the big reason whether or not these guys are going to return on investment is do we believe in Baker Mayfield? Fourth round draft pick, Bucky Irvin, running back out of Oregon. Really like him. He's a 4-5 guy in the 40, which means he probably is going to leave a little bit on the field. I do like how he plays. He's good at football. That's probably the biggest thing that I'll take away from him. Can be kind of a satellite back. We're going to talk a lot more about him when we get to the running back room. And then don't know anything about Elijah Klein, 6th round pick out of UTEP. Again, I just like offensive linemen coming in. It means they can fix things. And then finally, Devin Culp. This is a guy probably in like 3 years. If he makes the roster, he was the fastest guy in the tight end room at the combine. 4.47 guy coming out of Washington. Some stuff not to like, some stuff to like about this. If he makes the roster, I could definitely see him having some fantasy value down the line, but this would be even remembers like 2nd-year contracts with good athletic measurables. Like think like your Noah Fant, like we may be looking at a guy that is like 5 years away from being fantasy relevant, but he may end up being fantasy relevant because of these those athletic measurables. All right, moving on to the quarterback room. I said we're going to talk about this. So Baker Mayfield has a career year. He finishes as quarterback 10, and that's with the guys like Joe Burrow going down. So how repeatable is this? Not very much. I have him, if I can pull this up real quick, I have him at quarterback 25. He was going today on Fantasy Pros before I went live as quarterback 21. 138 overall. So like, again, another guy that I would not be looking at outside of 2 quarterback leagues. Going to be very difficult to win you a league, because of the lack of rushing upside. And unless he takes this massive step forward again in the passing department, and you're looking at something like 500 yards passing with an additional, almost 10 touchdowns, he's going to have a very difficult road to win a league overall. So like he would be in that category. If I talked about yesterday with Deshaun Watson, if I just put guys into 2 categories at quarterback, can win me a league, cannot win me a league, Baker Mayfield would go in the not win a league category because he's not going to have enough rushing upside, probably lacking the talent to even be a part of a higher volume passing offense to get to where he needs to get to. So I would probably be picking the under on this 4,000 yards passing, 28 touchdowns, the over on the 10 interceptions, and then the rushing yards and the rushing touchdowns, I probably would put as a push, like that's relatively where I would be looking at. Like, not going to be surprised if he has 2 touchdowns. Also, not going to be surprised if he has like, again, another, under 160 yards rushing. So that's what I'd be looking at with him overall. And the biggest thing is if he takes this step back in the offense, then all of our toys are going to be hurting. And that's when we get to Rachaad White here in a second, that becomes the problem. Is if Baker Mayfield's not good, that probably hurts Rachaad White more so than his ability to potentially be a league winner. It's Baker Mayfield is not good at football. Now they re-signed him, and I have it written down to your 3-year, $100 million contract, $50 million guaranteed. And then I believe there's an out after 2025. So again, when we talk about like Jared Goff, is Jared Goff better than Baker Mayfield? Yeah, it appears that is the case at this point. Would I rather build a roster around Baker May's 2023 and then have an Anton Winfield Jr., or would I rather have Jared Goff and not Anton Winfield Jr.? Yeah, I would probably want you to take the gamble that Baker May could redo 2023 with maybe a slight step forward with the upgraded offensive line, and then have like the best, one of the best defensive players in the league, then throw a whole bunch of money that I know can't outduel Patrick Mahomes. And I also know that Baker Mayfield can't outduel Patrick Mahomes, but I can at least build a team that can beat Patrick Mahomes in a different way. And that's how I would look at it. Now, the biggest issue when you are pulling the trigger on any of these Buccaneers toys at whatever ADP you or I are willing to pull the trigger on is how much you think Baker Mayfield is not going to turn into a frog. That would be the biggest thing to be talking about this offseason. So their backup quarterback, they went out and they re-signed John Walford. He's not really worth talking about. He's probably more of like a quarterback coach than anything. It's going to be Kyle Trask. He was a 2021 second rounder. And they brought him in with Tom Brady. And just to be clear about like how much they like Kyle Trask, they went out and they brought Baker Mayfield in, and he was able to beat out Kyle Trask. So, if Baker Mayfield falls apart, there's no savior going on with the Buccaneers, it appears at this point, with Kyle Trask. And I did like Kyle Trask as a developmental guy coming out of Florida a few years ago. I thought he was one of those guys that like potentially could sit behind someone and learn. And obviously the Buccaneers do not feel that way because of how they've been handling their quarterback room going forward. All right. Moving on to the running back room. So Rachaad White, he finished last year as running back 7, and the beginning of the season was an absolute train wreck. And this is one of those things that I would tend to talk about is it is very difficult to evaluate how teams are going to function year in and year out. So again, you're not drafting last year's production, you're drafting this year's range of outcomes. Trying to predict that like good defenses are going to be good defenses again, and bad offenses are going to be bad offenses again. There some of that is just basically going to be guesswork. At best, like you're trying to read the clouds, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything. There's other parts of it that we can look at and go like, this is a really tough road, a really rough stretch of the season to get started on. We saw that with the Giants last year. Their offensive line play did improve after they got through a really rough stretch at the beginning of the season where they were actually absolutely dog walked all over the park. It's the same thing with the Buccaneers. They went through the stretch at the beginning of the season against some good defenses. They really never were able to claw their way out of how bad they were as running the football until about like week 12 of the season. And then it kind of turned around for Rachaad White. So again, how much is this going to be Rachaad White not good at football? Maybe a little bit. He is more of a receiving back. That's what he does best. The running part is just because he's got that size and that athletic ability. You're buying more of the two things that, or both the two things that we like from a fantasy perspective when it comes to a running back. He is going to get the goal line work. That's what happened with him last year. There wasn't anybody else getting these 6 rushing touchdowns other than him. And then he's going to get this massive receiving work, and I can probably maybe pull this up when it comes to running backs and overall targets. That's what you're looking at with Rachaad White. He gives you that other thing that we want, which is the designed receiving work from a running back. And you can see right about, where's he at? My mic's in the way if you're wondering. So he's right there at 70 targets. He is a top 10 running back when it comes to opportunities out of the backfield. That's one of the biggest things we're looking at. So he's going to have the road to be a unicorn in a way that other guys do not have in fantasy football. And he also is going to get about 70 to 80% of the snaps in the rushing game, with right now projected to be the only goal line back. So the guy that they brought in, Bucky Irving, that I think has a better chance to eat into Rachaad White's role, because I think Bucky Irving at this point is a better football player, or I should say better athletically than Chase Edmonds is. He might actually be a better football player also. So if Bucky Irving wins the job straight away from Chase Edmonds, I might consider moving Rachaad White down the board a little bit, because there may be a 60-40 type of split going on. If Chase Edmonds wins the job, he stays on the roster. I would still be expecting that like 70 to 30, 80, 20 type of snap share that these guys were splitting at the end of the season. That's what I would be expecting. And they just were not giving high value touches to Chase Edmonds when he was coming in the game. So you're looking at like a bell cow usage, and then the actual 2 box checks that we want, which is goal line work and receiving work, design receiving work. The problem what we're looking at with the Buccaneers is how good are they going to be to uptick the amount of opportunities Rachaad White has. So 9 touchdowns is of somewhere between like half or a third of the total touchdowns we need the running back to be getting to win us a league, to be that legendary type season, to be worth it. That's what we're looking at with Rachaad White. That's the question behind it. And again, we're putting a lot of money and a lot of faith in Baker Mayfield being able to at least do what he did in 2023, if not take a slight step forward in overall efficiency. So bringing this back to Rachaad White, and I have this pulled up. This is the ESPN rankings. Rachaad White is running back 13. I think that is undervalued, because at the very minimum, I'm going to guess that he's going to end up as a top 10 running back just because of that receiving upside. And the more that Baker Mayfield struggles, the more that I could see Rachaad White being the de facto number 3 in the offense. Just the check down machine, getting the ball out to the guy, your best player in space. That's what you were buying last year, or at least I was buying with Rachaad White, because I went out and I bought him, is just this receiving work, the opportunities in the receiving game. And remember, receptions are more efficient than rushes. So I care a little bit less about this inefficient rushing as much as I care about the two things, the receiving work and the opportunity to score touchdowns. So that's what I'd be looking at with that. So when I look at a guy like Rachaad White going running back 13 overall, it becomes an issue of, yes, now he's undervalued, and he's significantly undervalued enough to me. How can I go attack this? And I can bring up our Fantasy Pros rankings. When I look at, this is the wrong one. Give me a second to go hunt this down. Must be this one. Now, when I look at my Fantasy Pros and he's going at running back 36 overall, that's one of the things that I would be looking at is how much further can I push him up? How much more will I have to spend to make sure that I get him? And then is he still worth the value of that pick? So at running back, or at 36 overall, running back 12, I can start getting into the range of saying, hey, am I willing to pay about like running back 8, 9 to go get Rachaad White, knowing that his range of outcomes is going to allow me to go compete with your Christian McCaffreys of the world. Like, that's what I'm looking at. Like, I could potentially get running back 3, spending running back 8 prices. That's worth it to me because the range of outcomes, if he fails, he falls back to about where he's going. So he's undervalued to me, and I'm willing to pay towards the middle of his range of outcomes. If I could pull the right one up again, I'm willing to pay closer to the middle of his range of outcomes. Yes, there's a little bit of risk still inherent in what the capital of what I'm willing to put in, but there's also a lot of reward with him. That's how I tend to attack the guys. So when I look at my rankings, I am putting guys up higher relative to the amount of capital I have to put into them. And if it's going to cost me basically nothing, then I push them higher and higher up my board because I'm willing to pay more and more ADP to essentially have the ability to still return on that investment. So with a Ladd McConkey in this case, to go back and talk about him, if I could go hunt down the right one, with a Ladd McConkey in this case, if he's going at 107 overall, somewhere down here, this is the wide receiver rankings. So if Ladd McConkey's going at wide receiver 47, it's like, well, would I go up and spend like wide receiver 37 prices to get that range of outcomes? And the answer is yes, because I think he's got top 10 range of outcomes for a wide receiver in a way that other guys don't have that road to get there. And to go back to the running back room, that's one of the biggest things that I'm going to be looking for in training camp is if they cut Chase Edmonds, that means that they really like Bucky Irving, because the only guy to really there isn't really another guy to talk about in the running back room for the Buccaneers. Probably the closest thing that we'd be looking at is going to be Sean Taylor or Sean Tucker. Sorry. The running back from Syracuse that made the roster last year, and he looked like he was going to be a priority handcuff to Rachaad White. They gave him this little bit of run at the beginning of the season, and then it just disappeared. So, like, that's why they went out and they drafted Bucky Irving. They don't have another running back on the roster that they like. They went out and they re-signed Chase Edmonds because, again, guys that can pass block and catch the football are going to have a certain amount of value to football teams. But if Bucky Irving, who can pass block and can catch the football, if he does what Chase Edmonds does, but better, then you have a redundancy on your roster. They're going to get rid of Chase Edmonds, and then they're going to go to Bucky Irving. That bothers me more with Rachaad White, and then I would be looking to move Rachaad White down my board because the theoretical pure opportunities, whether or not they're efficient or not, are likely to go down at that point. All right, moving on to the wide receiver room. Talk about Mike Evans last year. So he was one of those league winners. He was going about like wide receiver. What did I have written down? He was going about wide receiver 36, I think, last year. And then he finishes wide receiver 5. He was going like 58 overall on ESPN when I talked about him yesterday. So in this case with Mike Evans, the biggest thing is like over the age apex, you have that risk involved with Baker Mayfield. I'm less concerned with the age because Mike Evans can win outside of just pure athletic ability. He is going to be 6'5", 230, regardless if he loses half a step this year. He looked rather good at 30 last year, just torching guys, being big and fast. And if all he has in him this year is to be big, he still is going to be able to return on that investment in the red zone with those red zone targets. Again, this is going to be like how good Baker Mayfield is, how much we can trust Baker Mayfield. I have Mike Evans as wide receiver 18. He is going on Fantasy Pros, wide receiver 14, 23 overall. So the wide receiver 14 bothers me a little bit less than him going in the wide receiver 23 or the overall 23 range. I probably would like him a little bit better as 33 overall, so I can put him into my wide receiver 2 spot. And if he disappoints a little bit, I still got a guy that I can run as a 3 or a flex or a replacement level guy. If I spend a premium pick like 23 overall, that guy, if that guy failing to return on investment is really going to put me behind the 8 ball to make playoffs at that point. And again, like I said, he turns 31 in August. That bothers me not quite as much as Baker Mayfield. Chris Godwin next. He is going right now, Fantasy Pros, 77 overall, wide receiver 36. I have him wide receiver 36. I'm a little bit more concerned with the wear and tear on Chris Godwin. He does have that wide receiver 2 range of outcomes. Now, with Jalen McMillan and Trey Palmer coming in, these guys are probably more perimeter players than slot players. This is, actually didn't even see that note there. Chris Godwin moving back to the slot. If Chris Godwin's primarily going to run the slot, this may actually raise up his overall value, that we could get back to this ridiculously efficient 121 targets, 86 receptions, 1,300 yards, and 9 touchdowns that he had in 2019. If he's not used in a particular manner, and that's going to lower his overall touchdowns, that's going to lower his overall ability to return. And that's something I don't like. Again, 130 targets last year, 83 receptions, a less efficient 1,000 yards. And the biggest thing is those touchdowns. Again, if Mike Evans and K. Dot in the tight end, those type of guys, Rachaad White, are being used in the red zone, then there's less opportunities for Chris Godwin to score. That's just going to lower his overall value overall. But at 36 overall, I can, go a different direction at wide receiver, bring him in to maybe get a wide receiver 2 out of him at wide receiver 36. I could also run him out of flex wide receiver 3 or as a replacement level player, and I would feel pretty good. His range of outcomes probably a little bit more capped in the top 20 wide receiver range with the amount of opportunity or the competition for opportunities that's going to be going on with the Buccaneers. I could definitely see that occurring. That's why I would probably keep him as this low. And again, I'm still worried about Baker May being consistent and the amount of injuries that he's put on his body going into the season. 2 other guys to talk about. So Trey Palmer was running as a wide receiver 3 for most of last year. I don't necessarily think he's going to go away. It's going to be a little bit more interesting between him and this year's 3rd round draft pick, Jalen McMillan, like how these guys really work together in this room. I don't know if either of them are going to be fantasy relevant. Jalen McMillan's going like 240. Trey Palmer's going 280. I have them both together at wide receiver 62. If we could get an idea of who that number 3 is going to be in the offense, there is a story to be told where like either one of these guys could end up being the number 1 in the offense, between Mike Evans being over the age apex and those injuries that are accumulating on Chris Godwin, him being more of a slot only player. We could theoretically get that. I think that's not necessarily a good story to be telling, but it's there enough with some of the things that the Buccaneers did that, like, in your deeper leagues, one of these guys, if we could figure out who the wide receiver 3 is, that's going to be in this range. You can see with Trey Palmer last year getting about like 70% snaps maybe. And that's going to come down to this tight end room, because Cade Otton ain't coming off the field. You can see last year where he's running somewhere between like 100% snaps and like 94% snaps. Week 15, 90% snaps was the low of Cade Otton. He ain't coming off the field. I hate to bring it to you, like, 4 wide receiver sets, Cade Otton's not coming off the field. That's just how it's going to go. Like, Cade Otton is the de facto wide receiver 4 on this team. He's good at football. Wide receiver or 3rd-year breakout for tight ends that we're looking at, doesn't have the greatest athletic measurables. Last year, he finished as tight end 19, 67 targets, 47 receptions, 455 yards, 4 touchdowns. I definitely would put the over-under line on Cade Otton this year to be about 600 yards receiving and probably about like 5 or 6 touchdowns. I don't know if that's going to necessarily win anybody a league outside of like really deep leagues, but would be expecting that step forward in this offense with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, getting a little nicked up with the father time and all that stuff. Would be expecting that overall. And then the other thing to be looking at is if Devin Colt makes the roster, now we have a different conversation we have with Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan. This would even eat into Chris Godwin, who is going to be the number 2 wide receiver, because if they're running a lot of 2 tight end sets because they do like Devin Colt, that's going to lower the overall opportunities for Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan. So if you're wondering about, to pull this back up, if you're wondering about Cade Otton, I have him as tight end 21. He's Fantasy Pros. He was tight end 20, 162. Again, I think this is all in line with all that stuff. Even if he takes a step forward, I don't know how he wins me a league. Again, this would be outside of like deeper leagues. If you're like 14-man league, there probably would be guys, different guys that I would be going with that I think have like higher ranges of outcomes. I'm going to bring this up real quick. The big problem with him is he has to take a step forward to get into that 700 yards receiving and like 6 or 7 touchdown range to really be able to flirt as some type of like league winner going outside of that draftability range. And there are guys right now coming into a draft. I'm looking at my notes right now, like your Ben Sinotes, your Noah Fant, your Brock Bowers, Juwan Johnson, maybe to Tavion Sanders with the Panthers. Then you have like your Dalton Schultz, your Cole Kmets, your Dallas Goederts, your Hunter Henrys. Before I get to Cade Otton, and even like Michael Mayer might have a little more value. The Bengals tight ends might have a little bit more value overall than a guy that, even though I could say there is a road with Cade Otton where he finishes as the number 1 in this offense. I find it doubtful. With Rachaad White there, he may actually end up being like the number 5 target in this offense. Even though with that third year, with his ability and how much he's going to be on the field, I do think that we're going to see that jump forward with his production. So anyway, that's about all I got. Tomorrow I will be looking at doing the Cardinals.